About 2.5 years ago, I was preparing for a trip to Israel. As many of you know, I have close friends there, and before leaving, I had to stock up on all the American products they asked me to bring. So naturally, I went to Walmart, and as I stood in the checkout line, the older man ahead of me glanced at a sign on the wall that said, "Walmart has the cheapest prices." He pointed to it, and then he turned to the cashier and said, "Cheapest prices, huh? Funny, I don't see any Jews here." My ears burned. Did I just hear what I think I heard? And then he said it again, smirking. "It says that Walmart is the cheapest, but I don't see any Jews here." The cashier smiled awkwardly, but said nothing. I was standing just 2 feet away, and my face flushed hot. I was with Ari. I didn't want a confrontation, but I was seething inside. And in a split second, I turned inward. I thought, who am I? Who am I at my core? I'm a mother. I'm a Jew. I'm your rabbi and cantor. I'm a person whose every day is shaped by my Jewish identity. If I let this pass, if I stay silent, who will speak? And so the inner debate raged, wild and heated, anxious, until the words finally broke through. I stepped forward, interrupting his banter with the cashier, and I said, "Excuse me, sir. Did you say you were looking for someone?" Gets better. Startled, he stammered, "What?" I said, "You just said you're looking for a Jew. Here I am." He muttered something incoherent, paid for his things, skulked away, stifled, mildly embarrassed, at least for that moment. The cashier leaned toward me apologetically. "Don't mind him. He comes in here all the time, and he's a real piece of work." "Yeah," I answered. And he didn't realize he was spewing anti-Semitism right next to a rabbi. "Really?" the cashier asked, intrigued, even a bit delighted. "And really," I said, "and all this stuff I'm buying is headed to Israel in a few days." Then I added, "I had to say something. We are not going to be silent anymore." Only later did I realize the deeper meaning of the response that came over me in that interaction. I didn't call out this man for his anti-Semitism, and I didn't argue. I simply said, "Here I am." In the Torah, this phrase, "here I am," carries immense weight in one small word, Hineni. We encounter this word at the most critical moments in the narratives of our patriarchs and our prophets. When God calls to Abraham before the binding of Isaac, he responds, Hineni, "here I am." When God appears to Moses at the burning bush, calling him to redeem the people of Israel from slavery, Moses answers, Hineni, "here I am." When the young prophet Samuel hears the divine voice in the middle of the night, his first instinct is to say, Hineni, "here I am." Hineni is not simply a statement of physical presence like raising your hand. It's a declaration of readiness. To say Hineni is to say, I am fully present. I am ready to step into what is being asked of me, even if I do not know yet where it will lead. In Jewish texts, Hineni appears at times of great discomfort. Abraham facing an agonizing test of faith. Moses insecure before an impossible task. Samuel inexperienced and confused by a voice that he doesn't even recognize. Each says Hineni, Here I am. I am present. I am responsible. I am ready. The one who says Hineni is not only listening, but open to responsibility in spite of tremendous personal sacrifice. Now, we may not know it, but the instinct to say Hineni is embedded deep within all of us. How many of us have traveled around the world and searched out the Jewish communities? Often, this is a primary way that many people connect with their Jewish identity. Finding lost communities helps us to feel rooted and seen in the vast and long history of the world. It helps us to honor the struggles and suffering of our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. We search to find evidence of Jewish presence. And what do we find? I've heard it many times in travel throughout the years. At one point, this city in Rhodes, Greece, was a center of Jewish learning. This historic church, this historic synagogue in Toledo, which is now a church, Toledo, Spain, was the oldest in Europe. This university in Tübingen, Germany, housed the greatest center of Talmudic study. And this klezmer music was once heard throughout the streets of Polish villages. Ancient synagogues, Holocaust memorials, streets that once bustled in the city square with sounds of Yiddish or Ladino, we point and say, this was once a great center of learning, and this synagogue once held thousands. But where are they now? Where do they live and pray and celebrate? When was the last Jewish baby naming or bar mitzvah or wedding here? All too often the answer is they are gone. They were here, to be sure, but few, if any, are left to say, Hineni, here I am. All too often the story ends, here we were. In her book, People Love Dead Jews, author Dara Horn writes that the entire world finds great comfort in Jewish memory, but not in living Jewish presence. Look at the proliferation and popularity of Holocaust movies and books that often represent the entirety of Jewish experience. We are people that are dedicated to learning as a religious principle. Great Jewish works of commentary, philosophy, archaeology, theology, they're all out there. But just go into any bookstore or library and see how the volumes of Jewish wisdom throughout the ages actually stack up to the stories of persecution, specifically the Holocaust. And it doesn't even come close. Horn argues that the world prefers Jews once we are gone, once our voices are silenced, once we can be mourned rather than a vibrant part of society. Dead Jews are easier to love than living Jews who challenge the status quo and who insist on their own survival. She goes on to tell the story of the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam, which in 2019 asked a Jewish employee to cover his yarmulke with a baseball cap for neutrality's sake. It took the museum 4 months to deliberate on this issue and finally to reconsider whether forcing a Jew into hiding was a good idea. Judaism has survived because in every generation we have insisted in saying, here I am. I imagine that all of us here today are deeply concerned about anti-Semitism that continues to rage throughout our communities, our country, and throughout the entire world. In Connecticut, we have successfully enshrined Holocaust education into the school systems, but even in that, there is a danger of erasing our particular voice in that uniquely Jewish experience. Choosing not to apply the lessons of anti-Semitism to the realities and rhetoric of a virulent, morphing, and growing Jew hatred of today. Horn points out that the first edition of Anne Frank's diary deliberately downplayed her Jewishness, erasing references to Yom Kippur or Hanukkah. The world wanted Anne as an innocent child robbed of a future, not as a Jew persecuted for daring to live. Anne was just an innocent, young, articulate girl with unrealized potential, and this was her draw, the draw of her story to the masses. Not that she was forced to live in hiding simply because she and her family were Jews, and not that she and virtually everyone she loved was murdered as a result of Jew hatred. Horn snarkily refers to Anne as everyone's second favorite dead Jew. The entire appeal of Anne Frank to the wider world, as opposed to those who knew and loved her, lay in her lack of a future. Would her words be as revered, as beloved to the masses if she had grown up and lived her life freely and openly and proudly as a Jew? In its later editions, Anne's diary describes the celebration of Jewish holidays in the annex. They built a makeshift Hanukkah menorah out of scraps, and they fasted on Yom Kippur. Even under incredible duress of their circumstances, the 8 occupants of the infamous attic clung to the traditions of a living Judaism. In hiding, they declared, Hineni, here I am, and that enabled them to find holiness even in the depths of darkness. Judaism has survived because in every generation, our tradition gives us the will, the courage, and the inspiration with which to encounter our own joy, our own suffering, and our own humanity. We are not simply a people of here we were. We are a people of here I am. On the morning of October 7th, 2023, Keith Siegel, an American-Israeli dual citizen and self-described secular Jew, was kidnapped from his home on Kibbutz Kfar Aza. For the first time in his life, he began reciting the words of Shema Yisrael every day of his 484 days in captivity. 19-year-old soldier Liri Albag composed a makeshift Haggadah to celebrate Passover with fellow captives. Her fellow soldier, 19-year-old Agam Berger, refused to cook and clean for her captors on Shabbat, even at great risk to her life. 20-year-old Daniela Gilboa sang Shalom Aleichem every Shabbat. She translated the words to Arabic so that she wouldn't raise the ire of her captors by singing in Hebrew. These are the sacrifices by which Judaism lives and lifts us from the depths with hope and with faith. And so, the real challenge for us in this moment of rising anti-Semitism is not simply to visit the graves of vanished communities or to bemoan a world that hates us, but to live and to build and to support our own, to be an active part of supporting our community rather than remaining distant and apart from it in good times and in times of challenge, to root ourselves in the values that make Jewish life worth fighting for, and to be a part of making it vibrant and joyful and compelling, to rediscover what has kept us strong and resilient in spite of the odds stacked against us. We cannot allow our Jewish identity to be defined only by memory, but rather by the wisdom and inspiration of the ages, by our presence, by our engagement, by our learning, by our courage, by our hope, by a willingness for all of us, each one of us, to say, as Abraham and Moses and Samuel once said, Hineni, I am here. Here I am. This summer, our family traveled to Italy, and we flew in and out of Rome. On our first night, we found ourselves quite predictably drawn to the historic Jewish ghetto. We deciphered signs of the pre-Holocaust Roman Jewish community, but also enjoyed and took tremendous pride in the sense of renewal of Jewish life there. Bustling crowds, kosher and Jewish businesses catering to tourists and locals alike, shops with mezuzot on the doorframe, posters in solidarity with Israel of hostages, those who have been lost in the war with Gaza, and the glorious synagogue in the heart of it all. So after dining on our first real Italian meal, carciofo al Judea, Jewish artichokes, and spectacularly delicious kosher spaghetti carbonara, somehow reimagined with duck instead of bacon, we walked past the synagogue to the sound of a cantor leading an evening prayer. It was mystical. A gentle sunset peering in. We knew we belonged inside at that very moment. Despite the jet lag and exhaustion, our kids understood that there was no way we were just going to walk by. We went inside, and for the closing prayers, we stood for a few moments and prayed beside our fellow Jews, some tourists like us, some Israelis, many from among this living Jewish community. I was moved and took pictures surreptitiously. On the outside door frame, words from the Torah were inscribed in Hebrew. Ma norah hamakom hazeh. How full of awe is this place? Indeed, how full of awe. How awesome. Not far from this spot, among the ruins of Rome, stands the Arch of Titus, a boastful monument of the destruction of Jerusalem, the ransacking of the ancient temple, and the beginning of a long and painful period of Jewish exile. Many Jews come to stand in this spot in somber reflection. Some even come to mourn. But I look at it as the representation of an unequivocal, absolute miracle. For long after the end of virtually every other ancient civilization, thousands of years since Rome that sought an end to Jewish life fell, on the ruins of Rome, we stood. Here I am, Hineni. When we say Hineni, we are not alone. Through the prophet Isaiah, God says, before they call, I will answer. And while they are still speaking, I will say Hineni. Our Hineni calls forth God's Hineni. This relationship is reciprocal and covenantal. Our obligations are divinely inspired and honor that generations before us embraced and lovingly gave to us. They sacrificed so that we too might inherit it with love and joy and create a purposeful life that brings light and holiness into the world. So let us this year stand together and say, here I am, Hineni. I'm ready for the call with my presence, with my support, my commitment, my hope for building a bright future for the Jewish people and for the world. Hineni, here I am. Shana Tova.